Welcome to another What's the Why video. Today we're interviewing Steve Pick, the General Manager at Spencer Municipal Utilities. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at SMU.
Sure. So I've been with SMU a little over 20 years. I started in an accounting role. That's actually my training. I started at SMU as an accounting supervisor and grew through the ranks and became general manager 12 or 13 years ago. Time flies when you're having fun. So now every day I get the opportunity to lead 48 very talented, dedicated employees providing electric, water, and telecommunications to the community of Spencer.
Right. So talk to us. Certainly things have changed
Yes.
in the time that you've been here.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about the growth and changes at SMU.
So a lot of our growth really centers around technology. Even in our electric and water utilities, technology continues to be a lot bigger role in everything we do. But specifically our communications utility, recently we conducted our last fiber conversion. So the entire community is fiber to the home, which to me is a huge benefit for a community our size. Just recently, actually I think it was this morning, I read about Waterloo, Iowa getting a grant to start down the path of converting to fiber optics for their community. So when a community the size of Spencer has already done that and has had that for a number of years in some parts of the community, I think that really sets Spencer apart.
Yes, it does. And as you touched on, that is key for economic development.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me a little bit about that, about economic development and your role in that effort in the Spencer area and the corridor.
Sure. So I think when SMU and our board and our staff look at economic development, we really have a belief that if the community is successful, our utility will be successful. Mm-hmm. And because our utility's been successful and we're a for-profit or a non-for-profit publicly owned utility, all of that gets reinvested in the community. So we set our rates low. And then everything that we do make gets reinvested in the community. So all of that infrastructure, the fiber optics that I mentioned, all of that is paid for with the profits. And then anything above that, we reinvest in community projects. Mm-hmm. So economic development projects, community projects, all of that type of thing is all about community growth for our customers.
Absolutely. So talk about that. Let's expand a little bit on economic development from SMU's perspective. What are some of the priorities of your organization as related to economic development?
Sure. Most utilities would probably say load growth. Mm-hmm. And certainly that's a consideration, but I would say with us being a three utility, we look at that a little bit differently. So maybe it's a new business coming to town that's not going to be a huge electric or water or even telecommunications user, but maybe it's a technology company that's going to bring a lot of employees to town, which will lead to some incremental load growth. Lots of employees, lots of housing, lots of incremental load growth for us, lots of residual growth in other businesses in the community. So for us, because of our community mindset, we take a lot different approach to load growth and just looking at the initial business, and we're not necessarily focused on one business and that business being the end all to our business.
Right. Nationally, water is a conversation in economic development, and we feel like the water resource here is something that is really an asset to the community. The businesses have talked to us about their satisfaction with SMU and their partnerships and relationships. So transitioning a little bit to the relationship and partnership with the corridor, even recently we've had a lot of projects that it's great to just pick up the phone and get to work on things and keep them moving forward. So talk a little bit about that partnership and relationship between SMU and the corridor.
Sure. So being a small utility, whether it's economic development or power supply or buying ESPN, for instance, it's really about partnerships. And for us, when we look at the corridor, it's a partnership of expertise. So we don't have the staffing to be experts in everything. Mm-hmm. Certainly in economic development, the corridor is that expertise for us. So it's an extension of our team when it comes to those type of resources. And locally, the things that we partner with the corridor on are Facilitating Jobs Trust, which is a partnership between SMU and the city where we fund job creation and retention. Years ago, we had the Quality Housing Initiative that the corridor administered on behalf of the city and the utilities. So that was a big initiative by itself. Jobs Trust is an ongoing initiative. It could be a one project, like you're aware of the current projects that are going on, but a business calls in and says, hey, we have this idea to start a meat locker, for instance, and the corridor brings all those partners together, the city, SMU, Iowa Area Development Group, Northwest Iowa Planning, developers, consultants, all of those entities working together, and it's really a partnership and really the lead entity of bringing all of those parties together.
Mm-hmm. So you work so much in the community and you have such a presence, but also statewide. Mm-hmm. There are networks of municipal utilities and, as you mentioned, Iowa Area Development Group. So talk a little bit about how, in your role at SMU, you also advocate for rural economic development.
So I think the best example there is a number of years ago, actually back in 2009-10 timeframe, we applied for and were awarded the USDA Red Leg designation. So we became an eligible borrower in that program. So it's a program where the USDA issues a grant to the utility or telecom provider, and then the utility, in our case SMU, is required to make a 20% match. That money is then lent out to a local nonprofit for 0% interest, and as those monies get paid back, all of that money stays in the local revolving loan fund, and then those monies get loaned out again and again and again, and it just continues to turn in the local economy. So I think that's probably the best example I can give in that regard.
So I'm going to put you on the spot.
Sure.
Any kind of an estimate of what that dollar figure has been invested throughout the area?
Total loans that we funded or total capital improvement?
Either and or whatever you might have.
So we've done, actually we have our fourth initial loan in process right now, and each of them has been a total of $360,000. The fourth one is actually a partnership with Iowa Lakes Electric. It's for the Oneota Environmental Learning Center. So that one's actually a $720,000 loan. We're each doing $360,000.
Wow.
So very, very substantial projects and really good projects for the community.
Yeah, hugely impactful. And as you said, every dollar is leveraging so much more and creating impact. Let's get a little more personal. Tell me about a few projects that stand out to you in economic development.
So I think, most people that don't do this every day think that, somebody gets a phone call and 30 or 60 days later there's a for sale sign on a building and something's happening. So I think for me one of the big projects was MWI Components and their purchase of the spec building. It took several months. It took individual meetings with Phil and Ben, the ownership group, the corridor staff, the city staff, everybody making sure Jobs Trust was involved in that one, everybody making sure that, as they looked at growing their business, expanding into a new product line, that they were comfortable with the building, they were comfortable with us being partners through Jobs Trust. It was just a great project helping a local company expand and grow their business. That was a really good project to be part of. Another one would be Midwest Woodworks, Jeff and Melissa Bedland. We had, actually when we bought our operations facility, we had a warehouse on the east side of town that we no longer needed. So we had it listed with a realtor for quite a while and went through quite a few price reductions, and actually through a board member got to know Jeff and Melissa, and they were building cabinets out on their acreage where Jeff's dad started the business, and they were interested in expanding. So they moved into town and got to know them and helped them out with their expansion. So that's another one. Northwest Bank's corporate office, that was That was years from the day we drove around town and looked at potential locations where the fiber connectivity would do, and this was early on in our fiber deployment, so from day one until they opened, quite a bit of time had elapsed, so it's great to see what they're doing out there now. And then on the housing front, Stony Brook, that subdivision had kind of stalled out, and the city manager Bob Fagan at that time called some, I think 8 or 9 of the big employers in town together and asked, what are the challenges? And this is 10 plus years ago, and it was employees already back then. And housing rose to the top of the list already 10 plus years ago. So Bob and I talked about Stony Brook and what it would take to get that jump started, and fast forward a couple of months, and the opportunity came up to buy out the developer and put a package together to do that. And then we found a builder to come in and develop it and build it out. So those are some of the highlights. Lots of great projects, but those are some that were really enjoyable to be part of.
Right. You mentioned housing. Rural economic development has seen some shift and change, certainly since COVID, with regard to timing of projects and priorities and supply chain and all of those things that we hear about. Your perspective, what do you see changing in rural development? And honestly, what are you excited about in our rural communities when it comes to growth?
So I think, as I mentioned earlier, I'm excited about our broadband network, our fiber network. During COVID, we deployed people to home. We're not currently doing that, but we did it quickly. During COVID, it worked out really well. The community, it worked really well because we had that fiber network. So I think that has some great long-term possibilities. I think as people focus more and more after COVID on maybe more work-life balance, I think the rural areas have a lot more to offer, and I think communities like Spencer that have fiber networks and great schools and great cultural activities have some really great things to offer that some of the more metropolitan areas don't have to offer. So I'm excited about that. I think from a utility standpoint, certainly supply chain issues are a challenge for us. We're working through that, but I think everything is attainable if we just have a good solid plan. We do carry a lot of inventories, so this year hasn't been a huge struggle for us, but we're focused on next year and want to make sure we can continue to grow when we need to.
So if you could use just one word to describe the corridor, what would that be?
I would say responsive.
Perfect. Right. Well, thanks for joining us and sharing your perspectives. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.